There's a Japanese concept so powerful that when you truly understand it, anxiety becomes impossible, not reduced, impossible. Have you ever noticed how your worst moments of anxiety always involve one thing? You. What will people think of me? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Every anxious thought is built on the same foundation, the story you tell yourself about who you are. But what if that story is the problem? What if the version of you that feels anxiety doesn't actually exist? In Zen Buddhism, there's a practice called Muga, literally translated no self. And it's not a metaphor. It's the systematic dissolution of the ego structure that produces suffering. When the ego disappears, anxiety has nowhere to live, because anxiety isn't something that happens to you. It's something your ego creates to protect itself. But there's a problem. Understanding this intellectually changes nothing. You need to experience it, and today I'm going to show you exactly how. Before we begin, I want to know, what's the anxiety that controls you most right now? Work, relationships, your future? Comment below. I read every single one, and your honesty helps others realize they're not alone. Now, let's start. The story I'm about to tell you happened in Tokyo. A man named Kenji, 34 years old, software architect at a major tech company, good salary, respected position, everything that's supposed to make you feel secure, beautiful apartment in Shibuya, girlfriend who loved him, parents who were proud. By every external measure, Kenji had made it, but inside he was collapsing, not slowly, dear rapidly. Every single day felt like walking through a minefield where the mines were his own thoughts. Kenji was drowning, not in work, in anxiety. The kind of anxiety that doesn't announce itself with a panic attack. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone, heavy, constant, inescapable. Every morning he woke up with his heart already racing. His mind was always 3 steps ahead, catastrophizing every possible outcome. Meeting at 10, his brain was already writing the script of how he'd mess up. Presentation at 2, he was already imagining the looks of disappointment. Email from his boss. Panic before even opening it. The strange thing was, Kenji was objectively good at his job. His performance reviews were excellent, his colleagues respected him, but inside he was terrified every single day. He tried everything modern anxiety management suggests. Therapy helped him understand why he felt anxious, but didn't stop the feeling. Meditation apps, 10 minutes of guided breathing that worked for 20 minutes afterward, then the anxiety returned. Exercise helped physically, but his mind still raced. Medication. His doctor prescribed anti-anxiety pills, which dulled everything, including his ability to think clearly. Nothing addressed the root. Until one Friday evening when everything collapsed. Kenji was in a meeting with senior executives. He was presenting a system architecture he'd designed. Halfway through, his mind went blank. Not because he didn't know the material, because his anxiety completely overwhelmed his ability to access what he knew. He stood there, frozen, staring at the slide on the screen. 10 seconds of silence that felt like 10 hours. Someone coughed, someone else shifted in their chair. Kenji felt his face burning, his hands started shaking. And then he said the words that would change everything. "I'm sorry, I can't do this." He walked out of the conference room, went to the bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and for the first time in years he let himself break down completely. That weekend, Kenji did something he'd been avoiding. He went to see his grandfather. Kenji's grandfather, Takeshi, was 82 years old. He'd been a Zen practitioner for over 50 years. Kenji had always thought his grandfather's interest in Buddhism was just something old people did, something to pass the time. But that Saturday morning, sitting in his grandfather's small apartment drinking tea, Kenji was desperate enough to ask, "Oji-san, how do you never seem worried about anything?" Takeshi smiled. Not in a condescending way, in a way that suggested he'd been waiting years for Kenji to ask that exact question. "Because I'm not here," Takeshi said. Kenji frowned. "You're right in front of me. My body is here, but the thing you think of as I, is not." Silence. "I don't understand." Takeshi put down his tea. "Tell me, Kenji, when you're anxious, what are you anxious about?" "Everything. Work. What people think, whether I'm doing enough." "No," Takeshi interrupted. What are you anxious about? Kenji paused. I guess myself, whether I'm good enough. Exactly. You are anxious about a story. A story called Kenji. But here is what you don't understand. That story is not real. Takeshi explained something that Kenji had never considered. The self, the I that we think we are, is not a thing. It's a process, a continuous act of narration. Think about it for a moment. When you say I am anxious, what are you actually referring to? Your brain takes sensory input, memories, predictions, and weaves them into a story called me. This story has characters, your personality, your history, your future self. It has a plot, where you've been, where you're going, what you need to achieve. It has stakes, success or failure, acceptance or rejection, safety or danger. And anxiety exists only within this story. But here's the crucial part most people never grasp. The story isn't happening to you. You are the story. Or rather, there's just story making happening. No author, no protagonist, just narrative unfolding. When you think, what if I fail? You're imagining a future chapter where the character called you experiences something bad. When you think, what will they think of me? You're worried about how other characters in the story perceive your character. But here's what Takeshi wanted Kenji to understand. You are not the character in the story. You are the awareness watching the story unfold. And when you realize this, truly realize this, the anxiety structure collapses. Because anxiety requires identification. It requires you to believe the story is real. The moment you see it as just a story, anxiety loses its power. This is Muga, Takeshi explained. The practice of dissolving the illusion of a separate self. But if there's no self, Kenji asked, then who am I? You are the space in which experience happens. Not the experiencer, the space. Kenji's mind was spinning. This sounded like philosophical nonsense, but Takeshi wasn't finished. Let me show you something. Right now, you're thinking about what I just said, correct? Yes. Good. Now notice. Who is aware that you're thinking? Silence. Kenji tried to answer, but every time he formed a thought, he realized something was watching that thought. You see, Takeshi said, there is awareness of thoughts, but the awareness itself is not thinking. It's just present, witnessing. So, I'm the awareness? No, you're not the awareness. There is only awareness. The sense of I am the awareness is still a thought, and still part of the story. Kenji felt something shift, not intellectually, deeper. For just a moment, the constant narrative in his head, the voice that never stopped commenting, judging, predicting, went quiet. And in that silence, there was no anxiety. Because there was no Kenji to be anxious. There was just being. That moment you just experienced, Takeshi said, that is Muga. That is the space where anxiety cannot exist. But it was only a moment. Yes, because your ego immediately reconstructed itself. The story reasserted itself. This is what the ego does. It fights for survival. How do I make it last? Takeshi smiled. You don't. You practice dying over and over until the ego understands it was never alive to begin with. Over the next 3 months, Takeshi taught Kenji a systematic practice. Not meditation in the Western sense, not visualization or positive thinking, a practice of deconstructing the self until nothing remained. This wasn't comfortable. This wasn't gentle. This was surgery on the psyche, removing the tumor of identity that had been growing for 34 years. The first technique was called Who is Anxious? Every time Kenji felt anxiety, Takeshi taught him to stop and ask, who is experiencing this anxiety? The first answer is always, I am. But Takeshi taught him to go deeper. When you say, I am anxious, who is the I that is aware of being anxious? This question is a trap, but it's a beautiful trap, a trap that liberates. Because the moment you try to locate the I, it disappears. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can find thoughts about yourself. See, I'm the person who always messes things up. I'm the guy who gets anxious in meetings. I'm someone who needs to be better. You can find sensations in your body, tightness in your chest, racing heart, sweaty palms. You can find emotions, fear, dread, worry. But you cannot find an actual I that possesses these things. There is only the experience happening. No experiencer, just experiencing. Kenji practiced this every single day. At first it was frustrating. He'd ask who is anxious, and his mind would immediately say, I am, obviously, but Takeshi pushed him. Show me this eye. Point to it. Where is it located? In my head? Is it in your thoughts? Yes. Then who is aware of your thoughts? Kenji would pause. Another thought? And who is aware of that thought? This could go on forever. Thought observing, thought observing, thought. But eventually Kenji realized something profound. The observer could never be found. Because there was no observer, there was only observing, no anxious person, only anxiety arising and passing. The second technique Takeshi taught him was called the body scan of dissolution. Every morning Kenji would sit in Caesar position, not to meditate, to systematically disassemble his sense of self. He would start with his breath, observing the sensation of air entering his nostrils, but not thinking I am breathing, just breathing happening. Then he would move his attention to his hands, observing sensations, pressure, temperature, tingling, but not thinking, these are my hands, just sensations appearing in awareness. Then his legs, his torso, his face. Every time the thought, this is my body, arose, Kenji would notice it and let it dissolve. The practice wasn't about feeling good. It was about seeing clearly, seeing that what he called my body was just a collection of sensations. No owner, no me inside the body controlling it, just body happening. After 30 minutes of this practice, something extraordinary would occur. The boundary between inside and outside would blur. The sense of being a separate entity in a world of other entities would dissolve. And in that dissolution, anxiety was impossible. Because anxiety requires a self that can be threatened. No self, no threat, no anxiety. The third technique was the most challenging, action without actor. Takeshi explained that most of our anxiety comes from the belief that we're choosing our actions, that there's a me inside making decisions. But he asked Kenji to observe his actions for one full day without claiming ownership. When Kenji would reach for his coffee, he would notice arm reaching. When he would speak in a meeting, he would notice words forming. When he would walk down the street, he would notice walking happening. At first, this felt absurd. Of course he was choosing to reach for coffee. Of course he was deciding what to say, but Takeshi asked him, where is the decision made? Kenji had never thought about this. In my mind, show me. When did you decide to reach for the coffee? Was there a moment of choice? Kenji tried to remember. He couldn't. The hand had just reached. The thought, I should drink coffee, appeared, and then the action followed. But there was no Kenji in between making the decision. The thought appeared, the action occurred. That was all. This is the truth the ego doesn't want you to see, Takeshi explained. Actions happen, thoughts happen, emotions happen, but there is no you making them happen. They arise from causes and conditions far beyond what you call self. Then, I have no free will. The question assumes there is a you to have free will in the first place. But if there is no you, then the question dissolves. 2 months into the practice, something happened at work that would have destroyed the old Kenji. His project, the one he'd been leading for 8 months, was cancelled. Budget cuts. The entire team was being reassigned. Months of work, gone. Late nights coding. Weekends spent debugging. Presentations to executives. All of it erased with a single email. His colleagues were devastated. Angry meetings, tense conversations, people updating their resumes. Someone punched a wall in the break room. Another person cried in the bathroom. The energy in the office was thick with resentment and fear. But Kenji felt nothing. Not in a numb way, not in a dissociated way, in a clear way. He watched his body sitting in the meeting where they announced the cancellation. He watched thoughts arising. This is disappointing. Not, I am disappointed, just disappointment appearing in consciousness. While he watched sensations in his chest. Tightness, heaviness. Not, my chest feels tight. Just sensations manifesting in awareness. But there was no Kenji to whom this was happening. There was just experience unfolding, like clouds passing through an empty sky. His colleague turned to him after the meeting. Aren't you upset? You put everything into this project. Kenji paused. Upset is happening, but I'm not upset. His colleague looked confused. That doesn't make sense. But it made perfect sense to Kenji, because for the first time in his life he understood the difference between experiencing an emotion and being identified with it. The emotion was there: disappointment, frustration, even sadness. But there was no Kenji who owned these emotions. They were just weather patterns moving through awareness. And weather patterns don't create anxiety. Only the story about what the weather means to me creates anxiety. A week later, Kenji was reassigned to a new team. The first day, he had to present his background to the new manager. 6 months ago, this would have sent him into a spiral of anticipatory anxiety, rehearsing what to say, imagining all the ways it could go wrong, replaying it in his mind afterward, analysing every word. But when the meeting came, something different happened. Kenji sat down. The manager asked him to introduce himself, and Kenji watched words forming. No preparation, no story about Kenji the software architect who needs to impress. Just presence, listening, responding. When the meeting ended, the manager said, "That was the most clear and concise introduction I've heard in years," Kenji smiled. But he didn't claim the compliment, because there was no Kenji to receive praise. There had just been communication happening. His colleague from the old team asked him to coffee. "Seriously, what happened to you? You're like a different person." "I'm not," Kenji said. "That's the point." "What do you mean?" "I mean, the person you knew as Kenji, the anxious, overthinking version, that person was never real. It was just a pattern of thoughts and reactions. When the pattern dissolved, what you're calling a different person is actually no person at all." His colleague stared at him. "That's kind of disturbing." "Is it? Or is it liberating?" Silence. Then his colleague asked the question Kenji had once asked his grandfather. "How do I do this?" And Kenji explained what Takeshi had taught him. "Let me be clear about something. Muga is not a technique to feel better. It's not a coping mechanism for anxiety. It's the complete dissolution of the structure that produces anxiety in the first place. And that dissolution is uncomfortable, because your ego will fight it with everything it has. Your mind will tell you this is dangerous. If there's no self, why do anything? If there's no me, what's the point?" These questions are the ego's last defense, but here's the truth the ego doesn't want you to know. Life becomes infinitely more functional when there's no self in the way. Actions become more efficient because there's no second guessing. Decisions become clearer because there's no "what will people think of me" filter. Creativity flows because there's no Kenji the creative person trying to prove something. Relationships improve because there's no defensive ego protecting itself. Everything works better when you get out of the way. And by you, I mean the fictional character you've been pretending to be. There's a famous Zen story that illustrates this perfectly. A student approaches a master and asks, "What happens when the self dissolves?" The master picks up a cup of tea and drinks it. The student is confused. "That's it? That's what happens?" "Yes," the master says, "tea is drunk." The student doesn't understand. "But who drinks the tea if there's no self?" The master smiles. "Drinking happens. Why does there need to be a drinker?" This is Muga, not the absence of action. The absence of an actor claiming ownership of the action. 6 months after that breakdown in the conference room, Kenji went back to visit his grandfather. "I understand it now," Kenji said. "Muga isn't about getting rid of the self. It's about seeing that it was never there to begin with." Takeshi nodded. "And how is your anxiety?" "Gone." "Gone?" "Not reduced, not managed, gone. Because there's no one to be anxious." "Good," Takeshi said. "But do not become attached to this state. The ego is clever. It will try to turn even no self into an identity. You will catch yourself thinking, 'I am someone who has transcended the ego.' That is still ego. So what do I do? Nothing. Just remain aware. The moment you notice you're creating a new identity, it dissolves. This is the practice. Not achieving a state and maintaining it, but continuously seeing through the illusion as it arises. But here's what I need you to understand. Intellectual understanding of Muga changes nothing. You can read this entire script, nod along, think, "Yes, that makes sense," and still feel anxious tomorrow. Because the ego is not convinced by logic, it's dissolved by direct experience. So let me give you the practice, not to read, to do. Starting today, Implement 3 exercises. First, every time you feel anxious, stop and ask, who is feeling this? Don't answer quickly, actually look. Try to find the entity that is experiencing the anxiety. You'll find thoughts about yourself. You'll find sensations in your body. You'll find emotions, but you will not find a you that possesses these things. They are just happening. No owner. Do this every single time anxiety arises for 7 days, not to make the anxiety go away, to see clearly that there's no one for anxiety to happen to. Second, for 1 week, practice action without actor. As you move through your day, narrate your actions in the third person. Don't think, I am walking. Notice, walking is happening. Don't think, I am speaking. Notice, words are forming. Don't think, I am anxious. Notice, anxiety is arising. This small linguistic shift creates huge perceptual shifts, because every time you say I am, you reinforce the illusion of a separate self. Every time you observe without claiming ownership, the ego weakens. Third, spend 10 minutes each morning doing the dissolution practice. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, or bring attention to the breath. Notice, breathing happening, then systematically move through your body. Hands, sensations appearing, legs, sensations appearing, torso, sensations appearing. Every time the thought, this is my body, arises, notice it and let it dissolve. Every time the thought, I am meditating, arises, notice it and let it dissolve. Return to raw sensory experience without the narrative overlay. 10 minutes every morning for 30 days. And here's what will happen. The first week will be confusing. Your mind will say, this isn't working. I still feel anxious. That's the ego trying to protect itself. Keep practicing. The second week, you'll have moments, just moments, where the narrative drops away, where there's no you anxious about the future, just the present unfolding. These moments will be brief. The ego will immediately reconstruct itself. That's normal. The third week, the moments will last longer. You'll notice yourself in the middle of a potentially anxiety-inducing situation and realize there's no anxiety, not because you're suppressing it, because there's no one to be anxious. By the fourth week, something fundamental will have shifted, not in what happens to you, but in your relationship to what happens. Events will still occur, challenges will still arise, but the story about me dealing with this will be seen as optional, and once you see it as optional, you're free. A neuroscientist at Kyoto University who has been studying Zen practitioners for 15 years made a fascinating discovery. As long-term meditators show dramatically reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain region responsible for self-referential thinking. This network is what's active when you're thinking about yourself, planning your future, replaying your past, worrying about what others think, constructing and maintaining your identity. In most people, this network is hyperactive. It never shuts off. Even during tasks that should require full attention, the default mode network is running in the background, constantly updating the story of me. But when they put experienced Muga practitioners in an fMRI machine and asked them to think about themselves, something extraordinary happened. The brain regions associated with self-representation barely activated. It wasn't that they weren't trying. It's that there was nothing there to activate. The neural pathways that construct the sense of self had atrophied from disuse. It's as if the neurological structure of the self had been dismantled, not through force, through sustained observation of its absence. And guess what else those brain scans showed? Virtually no activity in the amygdala, the fear and anxiety center, during potentially stressful tasks. They showed these practitioners images designed to trigger anxiety, threatened faces, dangerous scenarios, potentially embarrassing situations. The amygdala barely flickered. Because anxiety is a self-protection mechanism, it exists to protect you from threats to your survival, your status, your identity. But if there's no you, what is there to protect? No self, no need for protection. No need for protection, no anxiety. But there's something important I need to tell you. This practice is not for everyone. Not because it's too difficult, but because it's too complete. Most people don't actually want to dissolve the ego. They want to improve the ego. They want a better version of themselves. more confident, less anxious, more successful. But Muga doesn't offer that. Muga offers the end of the entire project of self-improvement, because there's no self to improve. So before you start this practice, ask yourself honestly, are you ready for the you that you've been defending your entire life to be revealed as fiction? Are you ready to lose the story you've been telling about who you are? Are you ready to function without the safety net of identity? Because once you see through the illusion, you can't unsee it. The anxiety will be gone, but so will the anxious person. And what remains is just life happening. No narrator, no protagonist, no story arc. Just the direct, unfiltered experience of being alive. For some people, this is terrifying. For others, it's the liberation they've been seeking their entire lives without knowing it. Kenji continued his practice. A year after that breakdown in the conference room, he was promoted to senior architect. Not because he was trying to achieve anything, but because when you're not constantly protecting a fragile sense of self, you simply do better work. His relationships improved, not because he worked on communication skills, but because when there's no defensive ego, conflicts dissolve naturally. His health improved, not because he forced himself to exercise, to skinned, but because when the story, I am someone who doesn't like exercise, dropped away, the body just moved. Everything got better, not because Kenji changed, but because Kenji dissolved. 2 years after starting the practice, he was giving a presentation to the board of directors, the CEO, the CTO, 20 senior executives, proposing a massive system overhaul that would cost millions, 6 months of his life condensed into 45 slides. Halfway through, one of the board members interrupted. "This won't work. We tried something similar 3 years ago and it failed." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at Kenji, waiting for his response, waiting to see if he would defend his proposal, get flustered, back down. But Kenji just smiled. "You're right. That approach did fail. Which is why this proposal addresses the 3 core reasons the previous attempt didn't work. Would you like me to walk through the comparison?" No defensiveness. No ego protecting itself. Just information being exchanged. The board member nodded. "Yes, please," Kenji explained. Clearly, calmly, thoroughly. By the end of the presentation, the proposal was approved. Unanimous vote. Afterward, the CEO pulled him aside. "I've never seen someone handle criticism that well. How do you stay so calm?" Kenji thought about telling him the truth, that there was no someone to handle anything, that calm wasn't a state he maintained, but the absence of the structure that creates agitation. But instead, he just said, "I've learned that feedback is just information. It's only personal if you make it personal." The CEO nodded, assuming it was some kind of mindset hack. He didn't understand that Kenji wasn't using a technique. He was operating from a completely different reality, one where there was no Kenji to take things personally. That evening, Kenji sat with his grandfather one last time before Takeshi moved to a monastery in the mountains. "Oji-san, thank you. You saved my life." Takeshi smiled. "I did nothing. I simply showed you that the life you thought you were saving never existed. But I feel so different now." "Who feels different?" Kenji laughed. He understood. The question wasn't a riddle. It was pointing to the truth he now lived. "No one," Kenji said. "No one feels different." "Good," Takeshi replied. "Then my work is done." They sat in silence, drinking tea, 2 bodies, 1 awareness, no separation. The question isn't whether Muga works. The question is whether you're ready for it to work. Because it doesn't work the way you think. It doesn't give you a better life. It reveals that there's no you to have a life. There's just life happening. And when you stop trying to control it, narrate it, or protect a fictional character within it, something extraordinary occurs. Everything becomes effortless, not because you've mastered some technique, but because you've stopped being the obstacle. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 30 days, practice the 3 exercises I gave you. Who is anxious? Action without actor. The dissolution practice. Don't do it to feel better. Do it to see clearly. And in 30 days, come back and tell me what happened. Tell me if you still believe in the person you thought you were. Tell me if anxiety still has anywhere to live. Tell me if the story of me still makes sense. Or tell me that it doesn't, that it never did, and that you're free. If you've made it this far, you're not like most people. Most people hear this and immediately their ego says, "This is too extreme. This is nihilism. This is dangerous." But you stayed. That tells me something. You're ready. Or at least, you're ready to be ready. Because Muga isn't about becoming enlightened. It's about recognizing what was always already true. You were never the separate, anxious person you thought you were. That was always just a story, and now you have the tools to see through the story, to watch it dissolve, and to live from what remains, which is everything and nothing, simultaneously. The script ends here, but your practice begins now, not tomorrow, now. Ask yourself who is reading these words. Try to find that entity, look closely, and discover that the observer cannot be found. Only observing, happening. Welcome to Muga. Welcome to the end of anxiety. Welcome to no one, nowhere, nothing. Which is the same as saying, welcome home.